I'm Bob Short, and this is Reflection on Georgia Politics, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library at the University of Georgia and Young Harris College. Our guest is Roy Moultrie, former member of the Georgia House of Representatives and longtime probate judge in Harris County, Hamilton, Georgia. Roy, we are delighted to have you.
Thank you, sir.
You were a member of the General Assembly during the time of three of the state's most compelling issues in the 20th century: the demise of the county unit system, the demands of federal courts to realign the state legislative districts, and finally, desegregation. We'd like for you to dig deep in your memory today, Roy, and share with us some of your views of those three major events. First of all, the Supreme Court decision that outlawed the county unit system. How did that affect you as the probate judge in Harris County?
Well, I had only held one election under the county unit system, so it affected me only very slightly as far as the mechanics is concerned. But we, of course, were fond of the county unit system, being one of the 121 rural counties in Georgia. We had people that moved to Fulton County and honestly still voted in Hamilton. They said that they wanted their vote to count for 25 or 30 or whatever in Fulton County. But it was a bitter pill as far as the influence that we had, because every third term we had the state senator, and we sort of liked the county unit system. It was a county that supported Gene Talmadge and all of the people of that nature, and so it was hard. It was a hard pill to swallow.
How about the Supreme Court decision that on reapportionment, the one man, one vote edict?
Well, really and truly, at the point in time when I was probate judge, I wasn't really affected personally by it, because we just didn't have anything anyway except a representative that was from 2 or 3 counties and state senator that was on the county unit. So again, we were affected by the state representative and state senator, but also it was something the people had thought that the Democratic primary, the Neal primary, one time known as the white primary, was the way to elect people. We had no such thing as a Republican Party, and I know you've read 1,000 times about the Democratic nomination was tantamount to election, and that's true, but we still had the general election, but it affected us in those ways.
Originally, under the old O'Neill Primary Act of 1917, every Georgia county had at least one state representative. And then when reapportionment came, you went into a district of several counties. How large was the legislative district that affected you?
It was probably part of Talmadge, Harris, Muskogee counties. And again, at that time, we had a representative, and we never lost our representative. So really didn't consider that to hurt us as far as a state representative. We never had another senator, but we did maintain their state representative, so apparently we had the vote that
Is that true until today?
Today we still don't. Well, they have a representative, because in the reapportionment of 1991, I was in the legislature. We created a district containing all of Harris County, part of northern Muskogee County, and part of southern Troup County. And that is true today, and we've had state representative, to my personal knowledge, since the 1940s, back even when we had the county unit system, and afterwards, and we still do. State senator, we still share with Muskogee County.
How long were you ordinary?
I was ordinary for only about 3 years, because they changed the name to probate judge, but I was in that office for 28 years.
28 years. You were in charge of the elections.
I was election superintendent for those 28 years.
And you insisted on honest elections.
Of course. We voted the old paper ballots like everybody else did, but when they created the federal money that came down to the counties, I went to my commissioners and said, I want $60,000 of this money. That was a good share of it. And they looked at me funny because they'd been thinking about roads. And I said, I can't get poll workers to work all night counting paper ballots. And I can buy these Shoop voting machines that have been discontinued by other districts for $2,000 a piece, and I want 30 of them. So that when the poll workers at 7 o'clock at night, they can pull a lever and look at some totals and be through. There'll be no question about the count, and there'll be no question about the honesty. And so they looked at me funny and said, why can't we charge them? I said, well, the state law does not allow a county to sign a contract for payments exceeding 12 months, which was the law at that time. And so I went back, though, to the Shoop voting machine company, and they said, no, we can't do that. So we're going to lease them to you for 1/5 of the value, $12,000 a year. And after 5 years, for $1, we'll give you the machine. So we did have honest elections. The Shoop machine, to me, was the most honest and foolproof machine that they ever had. But of course, after I left office, the vote recorders and electronic device came into being.
What do you think about the electronic method?
I like it personally, and again, you have results without having to count ballots. The one drawback is that in most of those machines, there's no paper trail. You vote electronically, you turn your card back into the poll manager, and that's it. It's recorded your vote. And I don't impute dishonesty to anyone, but having been in that position for 28 years, I sympathize with them, and I know things can happen. But I have no problem with the electronic method, and I think they will perfect a method by which there will be a paper trail.
How about voter ID?
I think it's very, very necessary. In the legislature, I served on the State of the Republic Committee, which became Governmental Affairs, and chaired for 4 years, the subcommittee on election laws. And we had a senator to come, and Denny Groover was on that committee, and I think this was probably in '85, and he proposed a bill that would allow voters to register by simply sending in a postcard to the county election manager or the proper person with their name and address. And Denny solved the problem because he said, Senator, I don't believe that anything that's no trouble is worthwhile. And that was the end of that. And so I have always had a strong feeling that the voter identification, particularly in metropolitan areas, is necessary.
Roy, before we get into your early life, which we are eager to find out about, you mentioned Denny Groover. He was a hero in the Georgia General Assembly. What do you remember about him?
Denny was the majority whip assistant. No, he was majority whip. But he appointed me, the back row boy, as his assistant. And my job was to poll people on how you're going to vote on a certain bill, because they wanted to know when to call it up. Well, I only had one of the other party on the back row, so it was a simple situation. But I worked with Denny, and I grew to be very fond of Denny, and also served with him on the Governmental Affairs Committee. He was a brilliant man, and I think an honest man. He had funny ideas about certain things, but I think he was a great man, and just very fond of him.
Had the reputation of Grooverizing bills.
Every bill that we had to be Grooverized. And of course, you might not have agreed with Denny, but he made sense on his position. But yes, he was there most of the time I was there, but every bill had to be Grooverized.
Okay. Now we'd like to hear about Roy Moultrie and his early life.
Well, of course, I was born April 2nd, 1932 in rural Harris County, Route 1 Hamilton. Hamilton was only a place that we got our fertilizer, but we had only one physician in the county at that time, and he was in Chipley, 20 miles away. He came when they sent for him, and I was stubborn. It was April the 1st. I didn't want to be born, I don't guess, on Fool's Day. So he spent the night, and I was delivered on April 2nd. And every time I went to that doctor in Chipley, he said, well, the office visit is $2 and you owe me $1 for working the garden. Your daddy made me hoe the weeds while I was waiting for you to be born. So I was born with those early beginning, and I grew up there. I went to Mountain Hill School, which was one of 5 high schools in Harris County at the time. And by the way, I want to tell you who our most famous alumnus is. That's Mr. Chet Atkins. Well, Saturday night was a week ago. I turned on Channel 30, Atlanta Public TV, and there was a tribute to Chet Atkins. And the first thing they showed was his home in Luttrell, Tennessee, where he was born, and then Mountain Hill School. And his comment was that coming out of that mountains of Tennessee, I thought this was a mansion. Because in 1930, they built this school, and it's still there today, a Cadillac. Brick, hardwood floors, 500-seat auditorium, elevated, tile roof. So Chet went to school there for 6 years. His father came to Columbus as a music director and music teacher. I'll tell you a little something about Chet because I like to talk about Chet. His father made him learn the classical violin because that was Mr. Atkins' favorite instrument. And people really don't know, I don't think, that his first job was playing the fiddle for Archie Campbell. But anyway, going on, went to high school. I only went to school 10 years at Mountain Hill, and I went to West Georgia College when I was 16. Did my undergraduate work, and then I went to Mercer to law school, graduated in 1953. Then I knew that I'd be drafted because everybody was, and I went to work with Crawford & Company Insurance Adjusters. I was found physically unfit for the service to the country, so I worked with Crawford & Company until 1956, and at that time the probate judge, ordinary, announced that he would not run for re-election. And I had people come to my house and want me to seek that office, and I said, no, I'm not interested in politics, and I don't know anybody except the western side of the county, and all we got over here is bobcats and bootleggers, and they don't vote. And so they kept on. So finally, after 3 people asked me, I said, well, I'll run. I went to my boss, and I said, I want to campaign on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, work Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and go to church on Sunday. So well, I'll take it up with the home office, which was in Atlanta, and he called the vice president. He said, you tell that boy to either be an adjuster or a politician, but we won't accept that. So he said, I tell you what, keep your mouth shut. You do what you want, and your paycheck will not be altered. And so I said, thank you. Well, I did that, and with the voters of Harris County, with the Lord's direction, I was elected, and served in that office until 1984. Through 1984.
28 years, you said.
28 years. And the people of Harris County were good to me, and I love them to this day.
Why did you decide to become a lawyer?
Well, you know, you look around when you're a kid, and you sort of want to know what you want to be, and I just decided being a lawyer was attractive. It was public eye, and you're smart, and you could make a lot of money. But then I had second thoughts at West Georgia, but college algebra made me a lawyer. I went to the registrar and I said, Miss Katie, what can I do and never take geometry, trigonometry, calculus? She said, to be a lawyer, they don't have to know anything. I said, yes, ma'am. So she became my advisor and let me take any course I wanted to until I built. Back then you needed 3 years of pre-law. Mm-hmm. And so she let me take most anything I wanted to, and that's admitted to law school on that. So I became a lawyer. First, I wanted to be one, and secondly, I didn't like math.
So you went to Mercer University?
Yes, I did, at Walter F. George School of Law, and we had 45 in my freshman class. Due to the Korean War, we finished with 15 because of the draft and the recall. But there was a small school at that time, and we had one building, and the library was on the 3rd floor, but it was a good law school. We had a wonderful time.
So then you ran for the state legislature and was elected. Tell us about that election.
Well, first thing I had to ask is, since I'm the election superintendent and I'm running for another office, what do we do? Well, the law was plain. You named 3 people. The Democratic Party had a supervisor. The Republican Party had a supervisor, and I myself continued. So I ran the election, and somebody asked me, said, who run the election? I said, I do, and they said, well, we don't bet on you. But anyway, it was no criticism, no reflection on anybody. I ran the election, and my Democratic and Republican managers didn't do me a whole lot of help. But anyway, after the election, I won and beat an incumbent 14 years in the state legislature.
Why did you want to run?
Well, felt like that we were not getting what we deserved. We never saw any money from the governor's emergency fund. We never saw anything. I felt like, that was my personal opinion, I felt like that I could do better and I could represent the people. But what really caused it, there was a glitch in an election of Supreme Court judge of Georgia. We had to hold a special election just for that one office. A mistake was made in the office of Secretary of State. And so I asked the representative, I said, get us $5,000 from the governor's fund, discretionary fund, because that's what it cost us to man 16 precincts with a minimum of 3 poll holders. And he didn't do anything, so I said, well, I guess I'll just go up there and get that $5,000. But that seriously, that was the thing that convinced me that I would run.
So you get up to Atlanta. What was it like being a freshman legislator?
Well, I made a mistake when the speaker called and asked me to vote for him for re-election, and I said I'll look into it. I didn't know any better. So I started off on the wrong side of the speaker, but he was nice to me and was always good to me. But it was an experience. We went over to Athens to the Continuing Education Center, to the orientation course. And I enjoyed that very thoroughly, and realized then I was really going to like my job. We stayed over here for 3 days and learned what we were supposed to do and that sort of thing. The speaker was with us and all of that. But anyway, it was quite a challenge to a country boy.
Yeah. Most of the work in the legislature is done through committees. Tell us about your committees.
Well, when I arrived, I told everybody that I knew more about elections than they did, and I was tired of those laws they were making. So I was put on the State of the Republic Committee, which at that time was the name of the committee, later become Governmental Affairs. Claude Bray from Manchester was chairman. I was put on Health and Ecology. Buddy Childers from Rome was the chairman. And there was another one called Human Relations and Aging. It doesn't exist anymore. And so that was my 3 appointments when I arrived. And I enjoyed all 3, but the Committee on the Election Laws was my favorite. Claude Bray was appointed to the appellate division of the State Workers' Compensation Court, and so Dr. Bob Holmes, professor at Atlanta University, was appointed chairman. And at that time, there were 2 subcommittees created, one for election laws and one for state employees. And I was selected as the chairman of the Election Laws Committee. And so that became a real challenge. Then on the Health and Ecology Committee, which is sort of misleading, it has to do with health professions. And it has 3 subcommittees. And the chairman of the Health Professions Subcommittee, Jim Purnell, ran for lieutenant governor. And so they asked I would accept the chairmanship of that subcommittee. So that gave me 2 subcommittees, and I did. And I switched off from the Human Relations and Aging over to State Parks and Natural Resources. So that was my 3 committees for most of my time.
Mm-hmm. So you served 4 terms?
That's correct. In 1984 I was elected, and I served through January 10th, 1992.
Why did you decide to leave?
Well, honestly, I was 62 years old, and I felt like I'd been in office 36 years, that I'd practiced law for 40 years, that it was time to stop and enjoy life. I had a full life practicing law, being in the legislature, and also had other businesses. And we had good friends up at Hiawassee. We came up and looked around, and we decided that's where we wanted to retire. And we bought property near Hiawassee, actually near Young Harris, and retired there.
So you've been involved in Georgia politics most of your life.
It did, and let me say the reason is Georgia Boys State, sponsored by the American Legion. In 1948, 1947, I was selected as the first citizen from Harris County by the American Legion post. I happen to have 3 brothers and brother-in-law and an uncle and several others, but I was selected to go to Georgia Boys State. It was at Georgia Military Academy at College Park. We had a great time, and that sold me on politics, is Georgia Boys State. And that's why I loved it. But again, I didn't know when I was going to get into it, but I'll give Georgia Boys State and the American Legion credit for that.
You remember the first statewide campaign you participated in?
Well, I guess I'd have to go back to M.E. Thompson, who ran for re-election in 1948, Herman Talmadge. Mm-hmm. Governor Thompson paved a road for 20 miles through Harris County from the Troup County line to the Muskogee County line, and I happened to live on that road. And I had eaten dust until I was sick of it. So we had to support Governor Thompson for his friendship and for his giving us that road. And so that was my first, and of course I was on the losing side.
Yeah. And Talmadge, what was your opinion of Herman Talmadge as a governor?
I thought he did a great job. I had no problem with it. And my daddy had been a Gene Talmadge man year 1. And so I had respect for Governor Talmadge. Thought he did a good job. I had no problem with that.
Was your father involved in the election in 1946?
Only as a voter. And in 1940 was when he had a good time. Lost Ellis Arnall.
Yeah.
Our next door neighbor was an Arnall man. World War II, of course, came along. He said, well, you know, there's a whole lot more Arnall people in this county than Talmadge. My daddy said, how do you know? Said, look at their windshields, all them A's. But anyway, I was proud of Herman, but my daddy was.
You might want to explain that to people who don't understand what the A was.
Well, in World War II, gasoline was rationed, and for people who were not involved in using their vehicles for business, in our cars, they received an A sticker. That was the lowest quantity of gasoline allotted was A. T was for trucks, basically, and for business use. And so, of course, there were a whole lot more A's. There was a lot more automobiles than there were trucks. And the T sticker indicated you got much more gas in the
Do you remember Governor Arnall?
Yes, sir. Because my daddy opposed him. But I remember this about Governor Arnall. Although I was born in '32, and I thought that the vote being granted to the 18-year-olds because they were old enough to serve in the military was a great thing. And so I remember that much.
Do you remember his argument before the Supreme Court on the freight rate case?
No, sir.
You don't remember that?
I don't remember that. Well,
yeah. Well, Arnall.
But I remember that he had the reputation of being an integrationist, and that didn't bother me at all at that time, and wouldn't today. But that was the main thing I ever heard about Ellis Arnall.
Following Herman Talmadge was Marvin Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
You remember Marvin Griffin?
I remember him well.
Good.
I supported Governor Griffin, and when he ran against Carl Sanders. Who beat Marvin? Anyway, when he lost the election.
Yeah, 1970, Carl
1970.
Sanders. Yeah.
Well, anyway.
I'm sorry, 1962, that's right.
62. Well, I was probate judge at the time. And my little school, Mountain Hill, had one fundraiser in September, another one at Halloween, and they supported the school activities. And we had a barbecue every Labor Day, and during election years, we had a campaign speaker. In 1940, we had Gene Talmadge. Marvin Griffin was there in '62. We had every county official on that platform. We had 2 members of the Board of Regents, both Callaway and Mr. Allen Woodall. And man, we served some barbecue. they counted the votes, and Marvin said they ate our barbecue, but they didn't vote for us. So we lost the county, we lost the state, but I supported Marvin.
Good. Then there was Ernest Vandiver.
That was a quiet election in my county because there was really no formidable opposition. And so it supported Vandiver. I was a member of the Young Democratic Club at that time, and had a meeting in Americus, although I didn't get to go. He was the speaker. And so the Young Democrats in the 3rd District were solidly supporting Governor Vandiver. So thought he did a good job as governor.
Let's talk about some of the decisions he had to make. He was governor when the Supreme Court declared the county unit system unconstitutional. He was a governor when the Supreme Court enforced its one man, one vote law. He was governor when the federal court ruled that the state must integrate the University of Georgia and also the schools. How did the decision to integrate schools affect you in Harris County?
Well, of course, there was opposition, great opposition. And there was no demonstrations or riot or anything about it, but the white people, of course, were opposed to it. And we went along with the situation as under the laws of Georgia. And then when they came down with the freedom of choice, we put that into effect in Harris County. And there were some African-American students who went to the predominantly white school. But then when the court decision came down that you had to have total integration, it was very peaceful, very calm. We closed 5 schools. We operated 5 schools, totally integrated. And there was never any violence, never any problem, because it was handled properly, and we have been living happily ever after.
Jimmy Carter said that Ernest Vandiver's actions during that period were the most courageous in more than a century. Do you think that affected his future politics? Probably.
I don't know to what degree, but it probably did. I don't think it did in my county, but I think in certain areas it would have.
He wanted to become a United States Senator and ran in 1972 and was defeated. A lot of people think that probably that was because of his willingness to obey the federal law and didn't continue the massive resistance that had been prominent throughout the South all those years.
That's probably true, but then look at who the opposition was.
Yeah.
You have to consider that.
Well, that's true too. Jimmy Carter. He's from your part of the state.
3rd Congressional District, yes, sir. That back in those days we had 19 counties. Americus was sort of the center, even though it was on the south end. And we had Congressman Dick Forrest, Steve Pace, who served years, that were from America. So Jimmy Carter was from the part of the country that really was the mother hen of the 3rd Congressional District. Well, he ran the first time, and I wasn't particularly involved in that personally, but of course he didn't win, because Bo Callaway was involved in the election, although not in the primary. But then the second election, I supported Jimmy, and my county went for Jimmy. But as he became governor, I don't know. I don't think that he was very popular with the people. I think the year that his last year in office, he was very unpopular. But I thought he did a good job, basically, except I knew he didn't have any rapport with the legislature. I knew he had that problem.
He was running for Congress when he finally decided to become governor.
I really think he wanted to run against Bo Callaway, because both were going to run for governor. I mean, I'm sorry, both were going to run for Congress, and then when Bo switched over to the governor's race, Jimmy did too. And so I really think he wanted to take Bo on 1-to-1, but it didn't come about. Neither one of them got elected to the governor.
Speaking of Bo Callaway, he's from your area of the state. His family is very prominent in that area. How well did he run his gubernatorial race in that area?
Well, Bo's personal friend was, still is, but I thought he ran the worst campaign I've ever seen. He, of course, Harris County supported him and would again. But he ran a poor campaign, I thought, and I think that when the thing started off and it was Bo versus Lester, Bo had a great majority of the vote, I thought. But when it came down to the election after the campaign, then it was a different story, although, again, my county went overwhelmingly for him. But we had hoped to have a governor from our county, and people love Bo, no question about that. But somehow his campaign just didn't make it.
But he was a good congressman.
He was, and I wish he'd stayed there, frankly, because of the results. I'd like for him to have been governor. But yes, he was a good congressman and a good neighbor.
Who succeeded him in Congress?
Well, you asked me a question I probably can't answer. Except I don't, Jack Brinkley? Was Jack? All right. I was involved in that campaign. Jack was a dear friend of mine, and we had some formidable opposition because Jack was not well known. He was from Attapulgos, went to Young Harris College, so he had come to Columbus to practice law because he married a girl from that area, one reason. But Jack was well liked, but we had a tough race. In the first primary, we ran second. But then in the runoff, he was successful and stayed there as long as he wanted to. Jack could be still in Congress if he wanted to be.
Let's go back now to that election in '66 when the legislature had the responsibility of electing the governor.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't there, but I'm sure you knew what was going on at the time.
That's true. The legislature, of course, selected a Democrat because I don't know what percent, but overwhelming the legislature was of the Democratic Party. And Bo didn't fare well. But let me say, before I forget, that our representative, who was a staunch Democrat, voted for Bo because of the county vote. And a few did. But it was an interesting time. I remember that Bob Hope had a radio show, and he had a skit. Somebody said, "Who do you think you are?" He said, "I'm governor of Georgia." So we were ridiculed and really was embarrassed by the whole country at that time. But as a lawyer, I always thought that an elected official, as Ellis Arnall was, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong election. But the Supreme Court upheld, the Supreme Court of Georgia upheld the right of the legislature to make that selection. The Supreme Court apparently wouldn't touch it. The federal courts didn't intervene. So it was affirmed that the legislature made the choice and he became governor. And of course, it was not to the liking of a lot of people, but it was done.
Did you know Lester Maddox?
Not at that time, no, sir. I later met him. And during the legislative session, Governor Maddox was there daily. And he spoke to everybody, and he chatted with everyone. So that's where I got to know Lester.
Good. How would you consider him as a governor?
I thought he was a good governor. I really do. I went with my county commission to see the state about putting a welcome center down at West Point on I-85. And of course, we had to go over and see General Truman, who was head of industry trade and all that sort of stuff. While we were talking to General Truman about the interchange, his secretary came and said, "Governor Maddox wants to speak to you." Well, he knew it was important, or his secretary would not have come in. So General Truman said, "Excuse me, don't leave the room, let me talk to the governor." And he talked to the governor, and he hung up and he said, "There's a colored lady over at the governor's office. It's Little People's Day. And she's appealed to Governor Maddox to help her keep her son from going to Vietnam. Her son's her sole support and the only child, And I want you to help him. General Truman said, I told him, you know, I was not the commanding general at Fort McPherson anymore, but I would see. That impressed me, that he had a Little People's Day, and it meant something. And he knew who to call to get some help. And by the way, that young man's orders were changed, and he did not go to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And I just thought to myself, this is the kind of government we need. And mm-hmm. so I was impressed with him, and I thought he did some great appointments mm-hmm. on his staff. And so I really think that Governor Maddox did a great job.
You served in the legislature with Governor Busby. How well did you know him?
Now, no, I went there with Joe Frank Harris.
Oh, I see.
I went there in 19.
So he was governor when you got there.
Right. As far as Busby, I thought did a good job. I was in, you know, because he was. I thought he did a good enough job that the legislature changed the law to let him run for a second term. Because before that, as you know, you had to serve 1 4-year term and lay out 4 years, and if you wanted to run again. But yeah, I was there under Joe Frank Harris and Zell Miller. So
you served with Governor Harris in the legislature?
No, he was governor when I got there.
Oh, I see. I'm getting confused here.
Yes, sir. Well, see, I went in 1985, and he became governor in 1985. I went to his inauguration.
Yeah.
It was, they had the platform out on the steps of the Capitol. Temperature was probably 30 degrees, sort of drizzling rain. It was a miserable inauguration, but I remember that well.
Yeah.
I was there. So yeah, he and I were simultaneous.
Yeah, so you served also with Governor Miller?
I did, and for 2 years, in 1991 and 92. And so anyway, yes, I did, and I liked both governors. I thought they both did a good job.
Did you vote for Governor Miller's lottery?
No, sir. I had promised my people I would not. My people didn't want Georgia to have a gambling bill of any kind, and they consider lottery gambling, whatever anybody else. And I promised them that I would not vote for it, and I did not. And I don't know that I would today, but I did not at that time.
Do you think the lottery's been a good thing?
No question that the money has been used properly, because the legislature with the leadership provided that that money had to go for education. We heard from the legislators in Florida saying, be careful. We were told it would reduce the taxes. And the state of Florida is taking that money and doing everything in the world with it, and we're having to pay higher taxes, so be careful. And Speaker Murphy and leadership did exactly that, Governor Miller, that money could only be used for education. And you know, it was a constitutional amendment, because Georgia had a constitutional provision against any gambling. And I knew in my heart and mind that it would be adopted. And of course, you remember it was. 67% of the voters was for it.
Right.
So I think the money's been used for a good purpose. I had a good friend who was not opposed to lottery on moral issues. He's a banker, South Georgia. On the Florida line, he said every mobile home we foreclose on is full of lottery tickets that didn't win. He said, I cannot vote for that. So it was those that opposed it was not just for a moral issue, it was also for a practical reason. But it's passed, and I think the money's been used properly.
It was a big issue in the governor's race in 1990 when Miller used it as the kingpin of his administration or his platform, and most of his opponents opposed it. The outcome of that election showed, I think, that he was right, that the people really wanted it.
That was the basis of my opinion, plus the fact of listening to people talk. So the fact that Governor Miller was successful with that platform and with the conversations I had with people, I felt for certain it would pass. And knowing that, I still voted my convictions and my promise.
Let's talk for a minute about Roy Moultrie after elective politics. What have you done since you left office?
Well, I just moved up the mountains of North Georgia and relaxed. I haven't really done anything except to keep my wife's yard in good shape.
You don't participate in politics anymore?
No, sir. That's one reason I think I moved up here, is to get away from it. I've been involved in it all my life.
If you were a candidate today, would you be a Democrat or a Republican?
I'd be a Republican.
Why?
Because of the record of the Democratic presidents. I feel like that, as Bo Callaway and others have said, I didn't leave the party, it left me, but I just feel like that our national politics under the Democratic administration has been a lot less than desirable.
Have you thought about the state party? Do you feel the same way about the state party?
Well, not necessarily. I just never really had a whole lot to do with the state party. When I was running for office, I never heard from the Democratic Party. I didn't know they existed really, except in the newspaper. So I really never had any contact or reason to know what they did and why they did it. So that was another reason.
So communications might have been one of the reasons that the Democratic Party has fallen in the state of Georgia.
That's correct. When I went into office, there was no Democratic Party organized in my county. And I sort of helped them get one organized because there were certain things that we did, particularly in elections, that involved the party. But it didn't last long. It sort of just disappeared. And when I was running for the state legislature and also election superintendent, the Republican Party was much more active and interested. And like I say, as I told you, the Democratic Party put up one supervisor, and Democrats won and Republicans won. And the Democratic representative about 9 o'clock said, I got to go home and cook dinner for my husband, and that's the last I saw of her. So they were not very active in Harris County.
Were you surprised when the Republican Party won the governorship in 2002?
No, I wasn't. Not really. I was not surprised at all. I just felt like that the Democratic Party had just gone to what we call liberal side, and that the people in my county and my area and my state were conservative.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not surprised.
There's some feeling even now that Governor Roy Barnes' actions on the flag was a major reason that he lost that election. Do you think that's true?
Not really, no. I don't. I know that there are always people that are against everything. And I know some people were against that, but I really don't think so. I think that, frankly, his attitude toward situations and people, because the comment that was made after that election in my county was that arrogance cost you more vote than dishonesty. Mm. And I think the people perceived him as arrogant. And that's my feeling, because Harris County is one of the highest per capita income in the state of Georgia, because all the people from Columbus that could afford it have moved, well, not all of them, but a great majority. And it's created a situation where the complexion of both counties are totally different. Had I run for re-election in 1992, I would have run as a Republican because of the influx of those people. It's a Republican county. And in the reapportionment of 1991, it created a Republican district. North Muskogee, South Troop, and all of Harris. And so I would have had no choice but to run as a Republican, and I would have.
You think the Democrats can make a comeback?
Oh, I think that's very possible. But I think that they're going to have to change a whole lot of their course of their actions. I think they're going to have to show that we love America. We want to do what's good for America. They're going to have to go back to motherhood, Chevrolet, and the country.
Yeah. Is that true, do you think, in Georgia, with the Georgia Democratic Party?
I definitely think so. Yes, sir. I surely do.
There's a feeling among disillusioned Democrats that their party, state party, has become too dependent on labor and minorities to ever make a strong comeback. Do you feel that way?
Well, I feel like so long as they elect officials who sympathize with that type of person, who thinks that everything ought to be a grant or a giveaway, who does not support the American principles, and that's a whole lot of territory, I don't think that anybody's going to go back to the Democratic Party that's left it until they change their course. And as long as they think as they do, they're going to be the minority party in Georgia. And they're going to keep nominating people who have that liberal ideology.
So you think that the change in political demographics and the influx of people from other areas of the country have had an impact on the switch of the parties here?
Definitely so. If you just think about your own county of Union and my county of Towns, your voters, there's a whole lot of people up there that were not born and raised in the hills like we were. And what was the results of the last election? Overwhelming Republican.
70%.
So I think this is a great illustration of what the influx of new people can do to you, do for you, to you, whatever. And I think that I could say in my own home county of Harris, the influx of the Muskogee County people, all Republicans, completely changed the complexion of politics in that county. And I think that probably Bo Callaway might have had some influence on that, having changed parties. Mm-hmm. We used to have a lot of fun picking at one another about it, but I respected him and I respected the party, and I would be a part of it today if I was still in office.
Would it surprise you if I said this? The other day a fellow told me that Georgia has yet to elect a Republican governor.
Well, I'd have to think through that.
Well, the governor, Sonny Perdue, was a Democrat who switched to the Republican Party, and Governor Deal was a Democrat who switched to the Republican Party. So his contention is that they both are Democrats.
Well, I can agree that they're Democrats by philosophy, but they're still conservative.
Right.
Governor Perdue was in the Senate when I was, first 2 years I was there. I didn't get to know him because senators and representatives didn't have a whole lot of things in common, as you know, with our speaker and our lieutenant governor, but I didn't know him well. But also Nathan Deal went to Mercer University just like I did, and was a good lawyer, but I just think that they are Democrats at heart, as I am, as far as if you describe a Democrat as the old throwback to the days of county unit system.
Yeah. As you look back over your career, what are you most proudest of?
Well, the fact that I was never defeated, that's one thing I was proud of. And I was born and raised a Baptist. Now I'm a Presbyterian Church in America member.
So you switched parties there?
I switched parties, but both of them are conservative, and both of them believe in Almighty God and that He's in control. And my life has been shaped by decisions made, I think, under the leading of the Holy Spirit. Now, I know that people that don't believe in God or Christianity would laugh at that, but I was raised poor, and yet I never had any doubt that I would go to college. When I finished my 3 years at West Georgia, my parents couldn't afford to send me to Mercer. But my brother was promoted to Georgia Power Company to the division operator of the Macon division. He moved to Macon. I had a free home. I never thought about politics as a candidate, but when the people started coming to see me, I was an applicant for a job as the Southeastern Claims Manager for Preferred Risk Mutual Insurance Company, Des Moines, Iowa. I was 20, believe it or not, I was born in 32, and in 1956 I was, as you know, wasn't 25 years old yet. And the guy, I talked to him on the phone out in Des Moines. He said, we want a man 30 years old, married, and 10 years experience. And I said, well, I'm not that person. But there was one of the agents supporting me, and he told that man, said, this is the man you need. This is the man you ought to have. You're opening a Southeastern Claims office in Birmingham, and he's going to be the man that open it for you. Well, the man said, all right. So he told me to fly to Des Moines. I said, I'll have to do it on Saturday and Sunday because I have a job. First Saturday that I tried, I got to Atlanta, called him to let him know I was on the way, and he said, don't bother. Chicago airport is closed, snowstorm, as is Des Moines. I was going to go 2 weeks later. I got to Atlanta. The old Cannella Field was closed down by the fog. Back in those days, fog closed that place. And those people got to coming and talking to me, and I felt the leadership to run for ordinary, and I did.
Well, you certainly had a very interesting life.
It's been a wonderful life. God's been good to me. And I just tell you what, the people, when I ran for office, they said, people will lie to you. They'll promise to vote for you and they won't. I never found that to be true. The people that said they was going to vote for me, they did. And so I just enjoyed my relationship with the people. I said, I'm going to do what's right. If you don't like what's right, then get somebody else. And you can come to me anytime and tell me I'm doing wrong, and I'll listen to you. I may not agree with you, but I had a great relationship with my voters, people.
That's great. Well, we certainly have enjoyed having you with us, Roy. And we invite you to come back whenever you can.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Good.